This Family Life News podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you.
It's Black Friday, the day that retailers want to move their finances into the black, starting a big retail season. Today, though, on this special edition of the Family Life Noon Report, we give you some biblical perspectives on how to make this a season that matters. I'm Greg Gillispie, and in the next half hour, you'll hear ideas on how your family can prepare itself in a good mindset. What Christians and Christian churches are doing to not rush the arrival of Christmas. And we'll deal with a big issue for many people, perhaps you, loneliness at the holidays. That's all coming up on the Family Life Noon Report. We begin with Josh Sumpter. He is a biblical studies professor and chaplain of the university in Western Pennsylvania at Waynesburg University. We talk about the significance that we're not in the Christmas season yet. This Sunday is the start of Advent. What does the average person need to know about why Advent is a significant part of the Christian year?
Yeah, that's a great question, Greg. Growing up, I did not attend a church that really focused much on liturgy, and so it was just Christmas and Easter. And I've come to learn that many church traditions, and even as we read the scriptures, we are invited into a season of preparation, a season of reflection and anticipation leading up to Christmas. And Advent, the 4 Sundays prior to Christmas, invites us to consider the arrival of Jesus, both the birth of Christ, but also the second coming of Christ. And the liturgical calendar invites us into these seasons of preparation, of reflection, of anticipation. We see that in Scripture as people are waiting for the Messiah. And even then, they don't fully get who Jesus is. They're questioning. And I think that these seasons, especially Advent, invites us into a time of reflection that causes us to slow down. We live in a culture that does not like to slow down, that does not like to reflect. We want same-day shipping. We want to jump immediately to Christmas, and Advent invites the church, invites Christians into a season where we can pause.
So the significance of this, remembering Christ's first coming and also anticipating his second one, how do we do that of reliving what the folks in the Hebrew portion of the Bible, they did not know how many shopping days until the Messiah shows up again. So the waiting was not a countdown, but a long period of waiting. How do we, in our time, in this in-between time, inhabit that anticipation in the same way that the pre-Nativity folks knew there would be a Messiah that had been promised, but didn't know, will it be in my lifetime, let alone will it be 25 days into December?
Well, I think that we are invited into the same ancient hope that they were invited to, because we have a God who draws near to God's people and makes promises with God's people and is faithful to God's people. And so in the Hebrew context, they had an ancient hope that they were clinging to, and we are invited into that same hope that they had, where we wait, where we expect, where we are longing for God's presence, both in the incarnation that Jesus has come, but we are in the already and the not yet of God's kingdom, that God is at work in the now, but the kingdom is yet to be fully realized. And so we still wait with anticipation. I had a friend in college that wrote songs, and one of the lyrics just still sticks with me. And he said that we are a people that wait with holy expectation for divine visitation. And oftentimes in this season of Advent, I reflect, am I someone that has holy expectation? Or am I just ready to jump to, okay, let's celebrate Christmas. All right, yeah. I think we are a people that are invited into an ancient hope, and we are called to live with that same holy expectation that they had in the first century and that we are called to have now. And expecting that God is present, that God is at work, and that one day God will return and reign again.
We're talking with chaplain and professor Josh Sumpter For the folks that you minister with in your own life or just sampling other examples, what are some significant parts of church activities, church events that make the Advent season of hopeful expectation meaningful?
I think there's a number of traditions or activities. I have small children, and my kids really love the Advent calendar, where we count down the days to Christmas, and they open little doors and to their calendar, and they get a gift or they get chocolate. At the church that I attend, in many Christian traditions, on Sundays there is the Advent wreath, to which a candle is lit, and each Sunday represents a particular characteristic that Jesus brings forth that we can have a longing for, of hope, peace, joy, and love. And those traditions, those rituals, those activities, they also cause us to pause. They cause us to slow down. They cause us to remember who God is and what God is doing as we live with holy expectation.
I don't mean to put you on a hot spot, but I'd like to get your perspective on, you and I both know congregations where we do not sing Christmas carols until December 24th, December 25th. We must do Advent, and there are some wonderful Advent hymns and things there. There are others who just fully jump into the Christmas, Jesus is here, joy to the world. Talk with us about that dilemma of how to celebrate Advent and or Christmas.
Maybe it's the cultural kind of Christmas carols that may not even be religious in nature that drive people crazy. But I actually think that the church, and I would say the church, the whole body of Christ, it'd really be beautiful if we sang Christmas hymns or Christmas carols that are rooted in the Christian tradition more often. Joy to the world should not just be relegated to Christmas Day or during Advent. What if we were singing that in March and in June and July? We're recognizing the birth of Christ, the incarnation, the depths of our theology of who Jesus is as the God-man through the songs that we sing. And I think our theology would be really robust if we remembered Christmas songs year round. And many of our Christmas carols, there's such good news. There's so much joy as maybe you gather with your church and you put your arms around each other, or you're lighting candles and passing as you sing Silent Night. And I think the gospel is truly proclaimed in those songs. And I think it would be beautiful in our churches if we didn't. I might differ from some guests on your show that are listening, but what if we sang those songs year round? And rather than just focusing on this little window that we have, it would really, I think, increase our theology. It would honestly be a way to proclaim the good news of the gospel that is in Jesus Christ year round.
Josh Sumpter teaches biblical studies at Waynesburg and is the university chaplain there in southwestern Pennsylvania. We switch to a new angle on this season heading toward Christmas, as Martha Manikas-Foster has a special edition of her Inside Out feature. How can your family use these coming weeks to really prepare themselves well for Christmas?
After all the build-up to Christmas, the rushing and the gift lists, the cooking and the wrapping, we can reach December 25th more exhausted than appreciative. God's church has an alternative for how we walk through December on our way to Christmas. It's called Advent, a slower, intentional journey. And we'll be talking about that today on Family Life's Inside Out, where we look at how God transforms his people from the inside out. I'm Martha Manikas-Foster, and my guest today is Chelsea Kingston Erickson. She's the editor of the new book, Longing for Christmas. So Chelsea, for those not familiar with Advent, would you briefly tell us when and what it is?
Yes, I love that question because regardless of what kind of tradition you come from, it's a wonderful, helpful practice that the life of the church can observe or at least learn from. So Advent really means coming or arrival in Latin, and it's a practice that the church adopted in order to think about the first coming of Jesus and then to celebrate and anticipate his second coming. Mm-hmm. And both of those things, what they do in our hearts as believers, is to help us appreciate his coming to us personally, his coming to dwell within us by his Spirit, and the way that Jesus' incarnation made the way for him to live, die, and rise again in our place. So it's really a way for us to celebrate the gospel coming to our lives and transforming us.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to talk about what our current context is and what that can mean for us because, I don't have to tell you, people feel isolated. It's a fractious time in the culture and among Christians. Do you think that the longing for God to be with us, Emmanuel, the core truth of Jesus' birth, do you think the longing is amplified by our feelings of not really being known by others and our dissatisfaction with the contentiousness all around us?
Absolutely, I do. And, our focus in this devotional and in Rooted ministry is to reach out to teenagers. What we see with teenagers that I think is even maybe more amplified than with adults is that they have the internet in their pockets. Mm-hmm. And so they're walking around always connected, always on. And so the effect of that is that they have this pressure to sort of cultivate an image of themselves and put it out there in the world. But I think they don't actually feel more known. They probably feel less known. And then the other piece of that, Martha, is that they're constantly seeing what's going on in the world or a certain curated perspective of what's going on in the world. And I think it's hard for us as adults to sort of appreciate what that would be like in those formative years, to be just seeing an onslaught of world events and sort of politicizing and interpretations of those events all the time. Our kids are just constantly inundated with both the social piece and sort of the global world events piece. And I think that does make them lonely. I think they are longing for beauty and truth and goodness, and many times they don't know where to find it. But of course, we in the church know we have the most beautiful resources in the gospel to point them to a better world that is coming when Jesus comes again. Mm-hmm.
And Christmas is part of that story, right?
It is, yeah, because our Savior came to a real time and place, a historical time and place in Bethlehem. He was born of a woman and had a human adoptive father, and he grew up in the world just as their teenagers are. So there's immense hope, I think, for them in that reality and that true story that unfolds in the biblical narrative. And we know that just as he came, he will come again to restore all things. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a beautiful thing when we think about offering teenagers not just sort of the truncated gospel. Obviously, they need to know that Jesus came to redeem them from sin. That's the most important part of the story. But also important is for them to know that the story doesn't end there, that there's a better world coming because of what Jesus will finish when he comes again. And so when we can connect them to that whole biblical story from Genesis to Revelation and show how it gives hope in their lives today, both socially and in sort of the global picture of things, I think that's just earth-shattering, life-changing.
Let me take just a moment to reset for those just joining us. And if you are just joining us, you're listening to Inside Out on Family Life. I'm talking today with Chelsea Kingston Erickson, editor of the new Advent devotional for teens titled Longing for Christmas. Chelsea, we can love the twinkle of Christmas and still hunger for more of the hope at the core of Christmas. How do you think Christians can spend Advent, these weeks before Christmas, in ways that help us appreciate its meaning?
That's a great question, Martha. At Rooted, one of our core principles for youth ministry is theological depth through expository Bible teaching. And so our goal really with the book was to root people, specifically teenagers, but also the adults who are walking with teenagers, in the story of Scripture. We think that's probably the most crucial thing you could do at Advent to prepare your heart, right? Obviously, we'd love for people to do that in community with one another. We'd love for them to be worshiping together. But in the comfort of their homes or in a small group or around their family dinner table, we hope that they'll dig into the many promises in the Old Testament about Jesus to see how they are fulfilled in his first coming and how we're still waiting for them to be fulfilled as he returns.
Maybe you've already answered this, but if we're intentionally walking through December and arriving at Christmas, what is it that you would hope people would understand or feel upon the celebration of Christmas?
I think, first of all, I hope they would see the connections between the biblical narrative and our own life. In all of these Old Testament promises, Israel was waiting and longing because they were steeped in sin. They were living in a world that was just filled with so much darkness. And often they were not getting it right in terms of their relationship with the Lord, right? They were struggling and wrestling with him and oftentimes in full disobedience against him. And, our teenagers find themselves in a really similar place, right? There's sin, there's their own sin, and also living in a sin-torn world. And so I hope that they would first see the connection between that Old Testament narrative, that true story that God is writing, and their own lives. But much as we spend so much effort, I think, when our children are young, I have 2 little boys, and we spend a lot of effort to make Christmas a really magical season for them. You know, my Christmases growing up were almost Narnian in their sort of effervescence and magic. And I grew up in a Christian family, but my parents, you know, leaned into sort of the wonder of the more secular elements of the holiday too. And I think there's something powerful about that, because what we want is for our teenagers, for our young children, eventually to come to a place where they know that the deepest longings they ever have will be fulfilled in Jesus. And so even in times of grief and loss and hardship, whatever that may look like, we want them to feel a sense of giddiness and anticipation for Jesus to come and make all things right, for him to make all things new, and for him to work in their own hearts so that they would love him more dearly. So I think there's a connection between, you know, the way our children may feel when they're really little about Christmas and the way that as adults and, you know, we hope our teenagers will feel thinking about Jesus coming.
You can hear more of Martha's conversation about how to prepare your family for Christmas. Go to the Inside Out tab at familylife.org/news podcast. You're listening to a special edition of the Family Life Noon Report on this Black Friday, this season while it's still Thanksgiving weekend, but also moving into Christmas time. That emphasis is joyous and a celebration for many, but these weeks ahead are hard for many people. Even without the holiday season, the U.S. Surgeon General in the last year called loneliness a public health epidemic. Studies say that 10% of Americans at any given time feel lonely. That gets more pronounced when the culture has all of the enthusiasm around it. So we spend some time with Dr. Mark Mayfield. He is a leader in curriculum development for the American Association of Christian Counselors. And I had a conversation with him recently about this season when people can very often not get caught up in the proverbial Christmas spirit. The move into winter and the move into holiday seasons, that is a time of loneliness. You've written the workbook. What is it about this seasonal affective disorder, the very appropriate initial SAD, seasonal depression? As you look at it from your clinical standpoint, how big of an issue is sadness and loneliness in this time of year?
Well, it's interesting. You know, it's shocking that about 5% of adults in the U.S. experience seasonal affective disorder, and for many it lasts, 30 to 40% of the year. And I think for the rest of us that see this or hear this, it seems pretty shocking. But what I will say is that most of the year people are pretty good at hiding their loneliness. They are able to put on the character, if you will, in the public or in their relationships that everything's fine. But when time change happens and, we have shorter days and our circadian rhythms are off, it gets harder and harder to, maintain in secret. And so it comes out and it can affect people in their families and their work, at church, and just in their functioning.
So it really is something about the biology and the meteorology. There's a physiological issue as there's less sunlight. Short of all of us moving to the southern hemisphere this time of year, what are some things we can do to help prevent that physiological reality, even before we get to the relational and the perspective things?
Well, I think one of the simplest things you can do actually is get something on. There's a bunch of different ones out on Amazon or even at Walmart, but getting a red light therapy. Red light is what the sun puts out, so that vitamin D boost. Blue light is what we get from our TV screens and our computer screens and our phones. And sometimes when we live in areas that are affected by kind of the dreary winter, maybe it's cloudy a lot of the time, we need that red light to help boost our circadian rhythm, our sleep-wake cycle. And so that's the best thing you can do. Is anywhere from $15 to $150. You can spend a lot of money on red light therapy, but all you really need is something as little as, the $15, $20 one that you put on your desk when you're doing work or sit with you while you're eating dinner or something like that. And it really just helps our biology.
add to the dimmer lights and the less sunlight, all of the social norms and the expectations of Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year, all of that. What is it about this season that you and your fellow Christian counselors see most in the people who come to you looking for a little encouragement or advice?
Well, it's something that we have to recognize that not everybody has worked through difficulties maybe in their family of origin. And so when, throughout the year, we're able to set boundaries and kind of remove ourselves from maybe toxic or difficult relationships. But there's this expectation, especially in the United States, to go home for Thanksgiving or go home for Christmas, and a lot of times that creates anxiety. It re-stirs up possible traumas and different things like that. And so there's kind of that unsaid expectation that, just get through it, get over it, you'll be fine. And it's not that easy. There's a lot of things that come up for people. And I think we have to adjust our expectations sometimes, that it's okay that it's not joyful and easy. And so how do we find ways to engage in life-giving community with people that get us and understand us? That's where church community is really good. That's why I really am a big proponent of small group communities and different things like that. The family that we choose sometimes is easier than the family that we're given, by birth at times. And so how do we foster those things? And then how do we set good boundaries with the family that we maybe are, expected to go back and see? Maybe instead of going for the weekend, I'm going to go for the night and then come home. Or I'm going to spend time with dinner, but I'm not going to go down those conversations of politics or religion or whatever that things might be that kind of create conflict and kind of keep it surfacey.
Our guest is Dr. Mark Mayfield of the American Association of Christian Counselors. He's written a book that is helping other counselors and the clinicians about how to deal with loneliness. For people who are finding a blue Christmas, whether that's just general loneliness or that the traditions have had to change because of deaths in the family or dynamics are different, you mentioned churches as being one of the opportunities to make connections that are meaningful with people. Can you give us 2 or 3 steps that somebody might want to say, okay, there's 3 of those, I'm going to choose one? What are the things that are effective in helping us deal with the somber feelings that sometimes hit at the end of the year?
Well, I think it's one, recognizing what they are and where they're coming from and not feeling ashamed about them. I think a lot of times we try to ignore or run away or stuff those emotions. And I think just going, hey, this is what is happening right now. It's not bad. It's not shameful. I recognize maybe that I'm not the only one that feels that way. And then the hard part, though, I think, is taking that risk to go, I'm going to go show up to church on Sunday or on a small group, weekend or midweek study and go, I'm just going to put myself out there to engage in conversation and community. And, I think a lot of times we put too much stock in one thing, and so trying to find different ways to engage different aspects of community, and then not putting the pressure on ourselves that's going to take care of the feeling. Really, the only way that those feelings are going to be healed is through the power of the Holy Spirit and through our relationship with Jesus Christ. But a lot of times it has to be fostered through connection and relationship with other people too.
I'm intrigued by what you say, that a lot of people feel lonely, whether that's holidays or year-round. There's something that happens in some people's minds and in their souls that say, oh, I'm the only one feeling this way and everybody else is doing fine. Maybe there's some encouragement there that you're not alone in feeling lonely. Our society is full of people this way. It's not unusual, it's not rare, and it's not a knock or a ding on who you are.
And I think if we were actually just able to verbalize that, just like you said, Greg, I, too, struggle with loneliness at times. And here's maybe how I've figured out how to work through it. I think a lot of times as a society, especially a Western society, we think we need to get over things. And we don't get over things, we get through things. And the way we get through things is finding out how other people get through things. And so sharing our stories and saying kind of, hey, I've been there as well, or I'm there as well, creates the release of pressure that I'm the only one. So talk about it, I think, is really important.
That conversation can happen a lot of different ways. As a representative of the Association of Christian Counselors, I'm sure you would say there are people who would benefit from going in and talking with a therapist, and people that normally would have qualms about doing that. This might be a time for you to step out and reach out, whether that's with a professional Christian counselor or talking with a pastor or finding some other support group. Help folks who are thinking about that to get over that hurdle of, well, that's not for me, or I might have to spill a lot of stuff that's very tender and personal.
Yeah. Well, I think the beauty is if it's a pastoral counselor, if it's a life coach, if it's a counselor, we're all bound to confidentiality. And so the beauty is we can come and speak to somebody and kind of bare our souls, and that keeps, it stays safe. It stays in that room with that person. And so I would just encourage people that whether it be a life coach, a counselor, or a pastoral counselor, take the risk this year to talk to somebody, because when you start talking and you start realizing that you're not alone in this and you start connecting with people, it really creates almost just a breakaway feeling of freedom to know that somebody else is there and understands you, but also that God is there and is walking with you.
Dr. Mark Mayfield teaches Christian counseling at a Christian university in Colorado. He's also developed a system for mental and emotional wellness for school districts. You can find out more about the workbook on loneliness from the website aacc.net. In this special report from Family Life News, we are moving us from the season of Thanksgiving weekend toward the celebration of the Nativity, not many days from now. There are happy and positive memories that surround this season for many, many people. But rather than rocking around the Christmas tree, we are going to just work our way around a roundtable of the Family Life News team. As we move from Thanksgiving toward Christmas, it is a time of a lot of traditions, and we want to take a little bit of time on our special broadcast today to talk about what our news team has as special favorites. We don't do this because we're the incredible, amazing examples and pillars of what Christmas can be like, but just maybe to inspire our listeners to do some of these same kind of stories at their workplaces and homes. So let's turn to Jeremy Miller first. Is there a special story that you have from that makes the season heading up toward Christmas Day especially important?
Every Christmas Eve. It's almost the same thing every single year. Usually I have to run out to get something last minute because I've forgotten. And I have to deal with the razzing from my wife and kids because I always forget something and have to run out to get that one last over the top thing. But mostly it's really just the time with the family. We all go to Lights on the Lake in the Syracuse area, where you just drive through. It's a bunch of Christmas lights. We like to see everybody's decorations, throughout the season, but that's really the big topper for us. And then it's kind of get the kids in bed, and my wife and I have a little bit of time to actually talk to each other. Which we don't get many opportunities to do. So it's like, hey, how was your year? What are you doing next year? Do you have any plans? Just a little chance for us to catch up and just be parents and just kind of enjoy where we are, and then get really thankful for everything that has happened throughout the year. That's kind of our big tradition. Oh, and of course, reading to the kids before they go to bed. It's always the night before Christmas and one of the Gospels.
Let's go over to Sarah Harnish. You've got a holiday story or two?
A Christmas Eve story also. We started a tradition probably 25 years ago of making homemade Harnish hot cocoa. So we make our own chocolate sauce and put it in milk, make our own homemade whipped cream, put little mini chocolate chips on it, and put it in mugs. And then somebody got the witty idea of taking 5 children, putting them in a van and looking at Christmas lights with the hot chocolate in their hands. So we've had some interesting mishaps with that, like getting stuck in a snowbank once when we couldn't turn around when we were looking at the lights on a house. And then it became involving the extended family also. So now we have like an 8-van caravan that goes with my sister and her children, and they all have hot chocolate and we all have hot chocolate. And we get lost most years at least once, and we communicate with walkie-talkies between vehicles. But you can picture in your head, hot beverage, many children. Now we have 8 grandchildren also, lots of cars, poor navigational skills, and a lot of laughter.
We are working our way around the circle. It's wonderful to have the entire Family Life News team all together. We usually spread across about 18 hours a day, so it's good to do this as we just talk about some of the meaningful things that we have found very important around holiday time. Let's go to Mark Webster. What's a favorite holiday memory of yours?
Well, I'm going to dip way back into my childhood, and I'm going to center on decorating our real Christmas tree. That process included putting on some fragile hand-blown glass ornaments from Slovakia that were brought to America by my maternal grandmother, though you had to be of a certain age before you were allowed to even get your hands on those and put them on the tree. And then we would finish off decorating by tossing decorative tinsel on the tree, which, at least into my childhood, was made of lead foil, which might explain some things. But moving on, prominent underneath our tree was a Lionel train circling through a village underneath. And also my favorite, a large handmade wooden dollhouse that was built by my maternal grandfather, who I never met. He died before I was born, but even at a young age, I appreciated the love and skill he put into that house. It included tiny handmade furniture in every room and working lights as well. That's one of my favorites.
Fabulous. And let's go to Bob Price. As you think through things that have made this season so special, what's a highlight?
Yeah, I want to spend Christmas with the Websters, the Harnishes, and the Millers after hearing their stories. But hey, it's Black Friday, right? And nothing says Christmas like spending money, correct? I mean, that's the reason of this for the season, right? But so I'm one of 13 kids. My parents never had much, so at Christmas time, we had a tradition where we would exchange names, and my dad would get a hat and put all of our names on a piece of paper in a hat, and we would draw a name, and then I would buy a present for whosever name that I got. And on penalty of death, guys, we were not allowed to disclose whose name we got. Once in a while, we'd cheat the system, but that to me was my favorite Christmas memory. Was that gift exchange, and we grew up in the country and never got to the big city, and this was back when shopping malls were a thing. And I remember getting in the back of a 15-passenger seat van and going to the shopping mall and seeing all the lights, and I was mesmerized as a young kid. But goes to the point, it wasn't about the stuff, it was about the stories. And the stories that we had as kids in a big family celebrating Christmas, probably my most memorable Christmas tradition.
These stories are magnificent. I've thought of a lot of mine that I could tell, but I think I'm going to go with one that has carried across generations. My wife, when she was young, her mom would make all these wonderful cookies, and they would do kind of a reverse trick or treat to the fire station. Christmas Eve, they would sneak up, put the cookies there at the door, ring the doorbell, and run off. So it was something nowadays, that was pre-2001, pre-9/11. You could go to a government building and run away and leave a package there. But as our children were growing up, we adapted that as well. And so we would always go out Christmas Eve, usually before the Christmas Eve worship service, and stop by the fire station and thank them for their service by dropping off some homemade cookies. And every time they were so appreciative. I think it's a sign of what we've talked about, time with family, time of giving, time of locking in memories that come back to us as we roll into this time of year. As you chat with other folks, I hope you will talk with them about your stories and your memories. Even if they're different now, there's something special about this time of year. And that brings us to the end of our special report from Family Life News. On behalf of all of the Family Life News team, we wish you much gratitude and many blessings during the rest of Thanksgiving weekend and during the season of expectation and celebration that is ahead. Thanks for listening to this special from Family Life News. If you'd like to listen again or share it with someone else, click Noon Report on the Family Life Now app or click on Newscasts on the left side of familylife.org. I'm Greg Gillispie, Family Life News.
Thank you for listening to this Family Life News podcast. If you've been encouraged by what you've heard, please share it with others and click the subscribe button to automatically receive future episodes. Family Life is a listener-supported ministry. Podcasts like this are made possible by your financial partnership. Find out more at familylife.org.